morning and welcome back to TVP World. My name is Alex Solinsky and you're watching World Talks. As Russia's war against Ukraine drags on, the EU is under mounting pressure to turn frozen Russian assets into tangible support for Kyiv. At this week's informal Gymnich meeting of EU foreign ministers, the debate gained fresh momentum, with Estonia's Kallas pushing for bold action. But legal hurdles, political hesitation, and questions of precedent still divide the bloc. Joining us now to discuss this further is Kinga Redłowska, Director of the Center for Finance and Security, Royal United Services Institute, Europe. Good morning and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning, Alex. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on. So now, that informal Gymnich meeting that I just mentioned at the beginning, it brought renewed attention to make use of frozen Russian assets. What concrete proposals were discussed by EU foreign ministers regarding their potential use?
Well, High Commissioner Kaja Kallas, in her press statement after the meeting in Copenhagen, was clear that no concrete decision had been taken, though we can hear some shift in tone. She mentioned that on the table, high on the agenda of the meeting, was indeed the discussion about the confiscation of Russian assets, but also, I think more importantly, other potential building blocks of the next EU sanctions packages. That would include, for example, secondary sanctions, a concept that the EU has resisted for a long time due to some historical reasons, and now it seems it's still on the table.
Now, what about, we saw Kaja Kallas also say that there are some sensitivities, that was the word that she used, around, this issue. What are these sensitivities that she was talking about?
The sensitivities have been widely discussed for more than 3 years now, and most of them has been clearly resolved. So there are those economic aspects that, of course, need to be taken under consideration in case of confiscation of assets or potentially changing the investment scheme for those assets. But so critics say that confiscation could destabilize Eurozone. Frankly, we all know this didn't happen in the most sort of fragile moment when those assets were freezed. And so there are no grounds to claim that this would happen again. And then, of course, some point to legal aspects of this decision. But this, again, has been debated by professors of international law that clearly stated that the law says that in case of illegal aggression, that the country that has been attacked and its supporters can roll out countermeasures. And so these arguments have been debated for a long time now, and we are at a point that political decisions need to be made to move on.
So given what you've just said, you mentioned, of course, that the argument of a potential destabilization of the Eurozone isn't something that we should be worried about. You also addressed the legal issues that some scholars, some people have been raising. And then exactly, you said that now it's political decisions that have to be made. What are some political concerns that are being raised by member states who are hesitant to move forward with the use of the frozen Russian assets?
Those concerns increasingly sound to be less political, but more economic. Belgium, which is a country that hosts Euroclear, a clearing agency that is that deposits Russian central bank assets, is clearly against both confiscation of those assets, but we've recently heard Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs saying that Belgium is also against changing the investment schemes around those assets. And in such stance, Belgium seems to be favoring safeguarding its balance sheet over European solidarity and, frankly, accountability to European taxpayers. We all know the pressure is piling to bridge the funding gap to help Ukrainian government support Ukrainian nation with basic services. And so Trump's administration has clearly stated that Europe will remain a sole payer for the Western support for Ukraine. And so it's very valid point raised by an increasing number of both policymakers, but also Europeans. Why would we put the burden on European taxpayers if we have Russian frozen assets that can be either confiscated or at least managed better? Because, Alex, as you might know, those assets were primarily bonds and now they matured. So they turned into a pile of cash that is not being invested smartly and effectively.
So given now what you just said, and also given the financial size of the frozen Russian assets to be estimated at over 200 billion euro, how much is realistically available for use, and in what form? Would that be, for example, interest or maybe principal?
So we have two options. As I said, the EU could decide to confiscate those assets, or the EU could think about some economic engineering to make sure we invest them properly. One idea that me and my colleagues from the Center for Finance and Security at RUSI put forward is to create a new fund, a reconstruction bank that would manage those funds, which would mean we wouldn't touch the sort of the basic assets, but they would be invested more smartly, and so the profit would be bigger. And so a similar bank was created after the Second World War in Germany, and it actually delivered and offered a very substantial input in rebuilding German economy. So there are different options available for European policymakers. What we just need is some countries like Belgium and Germany and France stop blocking. And frankly, Belgian stance comes across poorly, especially in light of initiatives and an offer of the Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski, who is willing to share the burden of potential lawsuits and is willing to share the burden of mitigation of any problems that Belgium might have after that. So European solidarity is a two-way street, and I think countries that are opposing this should seriously rethink its stance.
And what you just said towards the end there, the foreign minister of Poland, who, like you said, has said that Poland would be willing to take the burden in the case should Russia sue Belgium. So, I mean, what else do you think Belgium would maybe need to change its mind and finally move forward with this decision?
I think just a bit more of understanding of how dire the situation is, also from the perspective of Belgian citizens. European security is a pan-European concept. I understand that Belgium is getting profits from the tax from Euroclear, but economic aspects are not the only part of prosperity of a country. European security is also Belgian security. And so we just need to, those governments that are opposing, to think more holistically about well-being of their citizens, not just to over-focus on the balance sheet.
So we've spoken about Belgium. Why do you think that Germany and France are still reluctant in making such a decision and moving forward in using these frozen Russian assets?
France and Germany are, of course, European biggest economies, and so they are very sensitive about the stability of the Eurozone, and it's totally understood. Christine Lagarde has been also very careful in proposing any sort of action related to frozen assets. And this is influenced strongly by German and French stance. But again, back to my point and the argument that was even presented by High Commissioner Kaja Kallas before the meeting in Copenhagen. I think we should be more relaxed about the stability of the Eurozone. Again, because nothing really happened when those assets were frozen, there is really no ground to think things will happen otherwise when those assets are confiscated or at least managed differently.
And now, from your perspective, what is the moral or strategic imperative behind unlocking these assets? Is it about justice, maybe potential deterrence, reconstruction, or maybe all of the above?
I think all of the above. We can all see what is happening at the military front. Ukraine is struggling on the front line. Ukraine is struggling economically, and we've all heard about the funding gap that I mentioned. And so the country needs a substantial support in all those areas from its European allies. Again, in light of a very delicate and sensitive geopolitical situation with Trump's administration rebuilding global order, Europe just needs to be more muscular and deliver what it should deliver in order to help our Ukrainian friends, but also to secure its own security, economy and stability.
Now, one more thing I wanted to ask. What role is the European Commission playing in shaping this unified legal pathway to use these assets? And just how close do you think are we to a workable framework?
Well, the European Commission is just a facilitator. We need the agreement of all 27 member states to move forward or take some action in relation to those assets. So there needs to be a strong consensus, and the role of Brussels is to moderate those discussions and put them into a broader context, but also promote a stance that is a stance of all citizens of the European Union and all governments, and tackle and counter individual stances on this matter that are actually blocking. So we very often hear about Hungary or Slovakia blocking sanctions packages or being against some of support that the EU can offer to Ukraine. So now we are increasingly hearing about Belgium and Germany and France being a cohort of countries that are also effectively blocking progress in a very critical issues that are directly related to what's happening on the front line, what's happening in Ukraine,
unfortunately,
but also our
we have run out of time. We're going to have to put a dot right there at the end. Kinga Redłowska, Director of the Center for Finance and Security, Royal United Services, thank you very much for helping us understand this issue a bit more and for joining us here on TVP World this morning.
Thank you for having me, Alex.
And with that, it's a wrap for this edition of World Talks. But as always, do stay tuned to TVP World for more breaking news, updates, and commentary. Thanks for watching.